Hello, friends. I know it's been a while since I've posted. It's been a little bit of a crazy ride. All good. My mom's home. I don't know if I had mentioned that previously. We went on a little trip to California to see my daughter and some friends and a friend in Kansas. So we were gone a month. That's part of it. And just taking some time to myself, figuring some stuff out, which is a constant, I guess we're always doing that, right? Anyway, I'm going to read the chapter, a lot going on in the world. Rest in peace. I don't try to do political stuff, but rest in peace, Charlie. A lot of intense stuff happening. Okay, so I'm going to go where I left off. Let me just look here and make sure I'm on the right track. Ooh. Why did modern painting as a symbol? I did that one already. This is the one. The sacred soul of things. As we have seen, the starting point of the concrete was Duchamp's famous or notorious bottle rack. Not bottle rock, bottle rack. The bottle rack was not intended to be artistic in itself. Duchamp called himself an anti-artist, but it brought to light an element that was to mean a great deal to artists for a long time to come. The name they gave to it was objet trouvé, or ready-made. The Spanish painter Joan Miró, for instance, goes to the beach every dawn to collect things washed up by the tide, things lying there waiting for someone to discover their personality. He keeps his finds in his studio. Now and then he assembles some of them, and the most curious compositions result. The artist is often surprised himself at the shapes of his own creation. The artist is often surprised himself at the shapes of his own creation. Ain't that life? As far back as 1912, the Spanish-born artist Pablo Picasso and the French artist Borges Braque made what they called collages from scraps of rubbish. Max Ernst cut clippings from the illustrated papers of the so-called Age of Big Business, assembled them as the fancy took him, and so transformed the stuffy solidarity of the, and I wrote this down because I don't really know how to pronounce it, so I wrote it down. Let's just take a look and see what I said. Bourgeoisie, the bourgeoisie age, the middle class typically with reference to its perceived materialistic values or conventional attitudes. Bourgeoisie. And so transformed the stuffy solidity of the bourgeoisie age into a demonic, dreamlike unreality. The German painter Kurt Schwitzers worked with the contents of his ash can. He used nails, brown paper, ragged scraps of newspaper, railway tickets, and remnants of cloth. He succeeded in assembling this rubbish with such seriousness and freshness that surprising effects of strange beauty came about it. In Schweitzer's obsession with things, however, this manner of composition occasionally became merely absurd. He made a construction of rubbish that he called a cathedral built for things. Sounds like today's hoarders. Maybe they're artists in disguise. Just not enough time, too much pressure from society. You know, I know what it's like to feel like you want to save everything because you can do this with that, or someday you might need this or that. I get it. He made a construction of rubbish that he called a cathedral built for things. Schweitzer's worked on it for 10 years, and 3 stories of his own house had to be demolished to give him the space he needed. Schweitzer's work and the magical exaltation of the object give the first hint of the place of modern art in history of the human mind, and of its symbolic significance. They revealed the tradition that was being unconsciously perpetuated. It is the tradition of the Hermetic Christian Brotherhoods of the Middle Ages. Now, I looked that exact expression up and could not come up with, they said there was no, Google said there was no Hermetism in the Middle Ages, or no brotherhood, Christian Brotherhood in the Middle Ages. So I just broke it down a little bit, and I got to the best definition that suited me. If someone knows more about this, feel free to comment. Hermetism, a spiritual, philosophical, and magical tradition rooted in the writings attributed to the ancient mythical figure Hermes Trismegistus. It teaches that the universe is a mental manifestation of a single divine consciousness. All is one and interconnected. And by that understanding, universal laws, particularly through principles like as above, so below, its goal is gnosis, which is spelled Gnois. Gnosis, knowledge of spiritual or direct knowledge of the divine, leading to spiritual enlightenment and union with universal consciousness. Key practices within the tradition include alchemy, astrology, and thecracy, magic. Rosicrucianism came up too when I looked this up. A mystic esoteric tradition that originated in Europe in the 17th century, emphasizing spiritual enlightenment through self-awareness, a synthesis of wisdom through various ancient cultures, and the pursuit of happiness with God, humanity, and nature. And then a title of a book came up, The Kybalion Mysteries, which I put in my Amazon cart. Anyway, so let's see. Where did I leave off here? There it is. They revealed the tradition that was being unconsciously perpetuated. It is the tradition of the Hermetic Christian Brotherhood of the Middle Ages. And so I just read a little bit about Hermetism and Rosicrucianism of the Middle Ages, and the alchemists, who conferred even on matter, the stuff of the earth, the dignity of their religious contemplation. Schweitzer's exaltation of the grossest material to the rank of art to a cathedral, in which the rubbish would leave no room for a human being, faithfully followed the old alchemical tenet according to which the sought for precious object is to be found in filth. Kind of like, what is that saying about a coal turns to diamonds? Kandinsky expressed the same idea when he wrote, "Everything that is dead quivers." Not only the things of poetry, stars, moon, wood, flowers, but even a white trouser button glittering out of a puddle in the street. Everything has a secret soul, which is silent more often than it speaks. What the artists, like the alchemists, probably did not realize was the psychological fact that they were projecting part of their psyche into matter or inanimate objects. Hence, the mysterious animation, that's in quotations, that entered into such things, and the great value attached even to rubbish. They protected their own darkness, their earthly shadow, a psychic content that they and their time had lost and abandoned. Unlike the alchemists, however, men like Schweitzer's were not contained in and protected by the Christian order. In one sense, Schweitzer's work is opposed to it, a kind of monomania, and I didn't know what that word means, so I looked it up. Monomania, exaggerated or obsessive enthusiasm for or preoccupation with a thing. Sounds a little bit like autism. And yet, paradoxically, it is Schweitzer's monomania that robs the material in his creations of its inherent significance as concrete reality. In his pictures, matter is transformed into an abstract, in quotations, composition. Therefore, it begins to discard the substantiality and to dissolve. In the very process, these pictures become a symbolic expression of our time, which has seen the concept of the absolute, in quotations, concreteness of matter undermined by modern atomic physics. And I had to look that up too. Atomic physics, it just gave me documentaries that I could look up. Some of the documentaries are Einstein's Quantum Riddle, Decoding the Universe, The Secret of Quantum Physics, Clash of the Titans. That's what I found on that. Modern atomic physics. Painters began to think about the magic object, in quotations, and the secret soul, in quotations, of things. The Italian painter Carlo Carrà wrote, "It is common things that reveal those forms of simplicity through which we can realize that higher, more significant conditions of being where the whole splendor of art resides." I'm just going to read that sentence again. It's pretty packed. It is common things that reveal those forms of simplicity through which we can realize a higher, more significant condition of being where the whole splendor of art resides. Paul Klee said, "The object expands beyond the bounds of its appearance by our knowledge that the thing is more than its exterior presents to our eyes." And Jean Bassain wrote, "An object awakens our love just because it seems to be the bearer of powers that are greater than itself." Sayings of this kind recall the old alchemical concept of spirit in matter, in quotations, believed to be the spirit in and behind inanimate objects like metal or stone. Psychologically interpreted, this spirit is the unconscious. It always manifests itself when conscious or rational knowledge has reached its limit and mystery sets in. I know this firsthand. After my son was killed by the state of California, my unconscious kicked in, trying to figure out what the fuck just happened. When rational knowledge has reached its limits and mystery sets in. For man tends to fill the inexplicable and mysterious with contents of his unconscious. He projects them, as it were, into a dark, empty vessel. The feeling that the object was more than meets the eye, in quotations, which was shared by many artists, found a most remarkable expression in the work of the Italian painter Giorgio de Chirico. He was a mystic by temperament and a tragic seeker who never found what he sought. On his self-portrait in 1908, he wrote, "Et quid amado nisi quad enigma est." And what am I to love if not the enigma? And enigma is the mystery. Chirico was the founder of the so-called pittura metafisica. Every object, he wrote, has two aspects. The common aspect, which is the one we generally see and which is seen by everyone, and the ghostly and metaphysical aspect, which only rare individuals see at moments of clairvoyance and metaphysical meditation. A work of art must relate something that does not appear in its visible form. Chirico's works reveal this ghostly aspect of things. They are dreamlike transpositions of reality, which arise as visions from the unconscious. But his metaphysical abstraction is expressed in a panic-stricken rigidity, and the atmosphere of the pictures is one of nightmare and fathomless melancholy. The city squares of Italy, the towers and objects are set in an over-acute perspective, as if they were in a vacuum, illuminated by merciless, cold light from an unseen force. Antique heads or statues of gods conjure up the classical past. I'm fasting today, so I'm kind of dizzy. It's okay. Whew, breathe. In one of the most terrifying of his pictures, he has placed beside the marble head of a goddess a pair of red rubber gloves, a magic object, in quotations, in the modern sense. A green ball on the ground acts as a symbol, uniting the crass opposites. Without it, there would be more than a hint of psychic disintegration. This picture was clearly not the result of over-sophisticated deliberation. It must be taken as a dream picture. Chirico was deeply influenced by the philosophies of Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. He wrote, "Schopenhauer and Nietzsche were the first to teach the deep significance of the senselessness of life, and to show how this senselessness could be transformed into art. The dreadful void they discovered is the very soulless and untroubled beauty of matter," in quotations. It may be doubted whether Chirico succeeded in transposing the, in quotations, dreadful void, into untroubled beauty, in quotations. Some of his pictures are extremely disturbing. Many are as terrifying as nightmares. But in his effort to find artistic expression for the void, he penetrated to the core of existential dilemma of contemporary man. Nietzsche, who Shariko quotes as his authority, has given a name to the dreadful void, in quotations. His saying, God is dead, in quotations, without referring to Nietzsche, Kandinsky wrote in on the spiritual in art. Heaven is empty, God is dead. A phrase of this kind may sound abominable, but it is not new. The idea of, in quotations, death of God and its immediate consequence, the metaphysical void, in quotations, has troubled the minds of 19th century poets, especially in France and Germany. It was a long development that in the 20th century reached between modern art and Christianity was finally accomplished. Dr. Jung also came to realize that this strange and mysterious phenomenon of death of God is a psychic fact of our time. In 1937, he wrote, I know, and here I am expressing what countless other people know, that the present time is the time of God's disappearance and death. For years he had observed the Christian God image fading in his patient's dreams, that is, in the unconscious of modern men. The loss of that image is the loss of the supreme factor that gives life a meaning. It must be pointed out, however, that neither Nietzsche's assertion that God is dead, nor Shariko's metaphysical void, nor Jung's deductions from unconscious images have anything final to say about the reality and existence of God, of a transcendental being or not being. They are human assertions. In each case, they are based, as Jung has shown in Psychology and Religion, on the contents of the unconscious psyche that have entered consciousness in tangible form as images, dreams, ideas, and intuitions. The origin of these contents and the cause of such transformation, in quotation, note in parentheses, from a living to a dead God, must remain unknown, on the frontier of mystery. Shariko never came to a solution of the problem presented to him by his unconscious. His failure may be seen most clearly in his representation of the human figure. Given the present religious situation, it is a man himself to whom should be accorded a new, if impersonal, dignity and responsibility. Jung described it as a responsibility to consciousness. But in Shariko's work, man is deprived of his soul. He becomes a manicino, a puppet, without a face, and therefore without consciousness. In the various versions of his great metaphysician, a faceless figure is enthroned on a pedestal made of rubbish. The figure is a consciously or unconsciously ironical representation of the man who strives to discover the truth about metaphysics, and at the same time a symbol of ultimate loneliness and senselessness. Or perhaps the Manicini, which is also haunt the works of other contemporary artists, are a premonition of the faceless mass man. When he was 40, Shariko abandoned his pittura Metaphysica, he turned back to traditional modes, but his work lost his depth. Here is certain proof that there is no, in quotations, back to where you came from. For the creative mind whose unconscious has been involved in the fundamental dilemma of modern existence. A counterpart to Chirico might have been seen in the Russian-born painter Marc Chagall. His quest in his work is also a mysterious and lonely poetry, in quotations, and the ghostly aspect of things that only rare individuals may see, in quotations. But Chagall's rich symbolism is rooted in the piety of Eastern Jewish Hasidism. Did I write that down? I think I did. Hasidism. Didn't I? Huh. Thought I looked it up, but I guess I didn't. Well, I didn't write it down. I did look it up. Oh well. It's about celebrating God and that God is in everything. I believe that's the... I can't believe I didn't write it down. I remember looking it up. Especially since it's such a big topic in today's political world. But Chagall's rich symbolism is rooted in the piety of Eastern Jewish Hasidism, and in a warm feeling for life. He was faced with neither the problem of the void nor the death of God. He wrote, "Everything may change in our demoralized world except the heart. A man's love and his striving to know the divine." Painting, like all poetry, has its part in the divine. People feel this today just as much as they used to. The British author Sir Herbert Read once wrote of Chagall that he never quite crossed the threshold into unconscious, but has always kept one foot on the earth that has nourished him. This is exactly the right relation to unconscious. It is all the more important that, as Read emphasizes, Chagall has remained one of the most influential artists of all time. Because you have to let your conscious dictate the unconscious. I know this from experience too. With the contrast between Chagall and Chirico, a question arises that is important for the understanding of symbolisms of modern art. How does the relationship between consciousness and the unconscious take shape in the works of the modern artists? Or to put it another way, where does man stand? One answer may be found in the movement called Surrealism, of which the French poet André Breton is regarded as the founder. Chirico, too, may be described as a surrealist. As a student of medicine, Breton has been introduced to the work of Freud. Thus, dreams come to play an important part of his ideas. In quotations, "Can dreams not be used to solve fundamental problems of life?" End quotations. He wrote, begin quotations, "I believe that the apparent antagonism between dream and reality will be resolved in a kind of absolute reality and surreality," in quotations. Breton grasped the point admirably. What he sought was a reconciliation of opposites, consciousness and unconsciousness. But the way he took to reach his goal could only lead him astray. He began to experiment with Freud's method of free association as well as with automatic writing, which I have done automatic writing when I started a book. And it was just a free flow writing, no punctuation, nothing, automatic writing. So listen to this. automatic writing, in which the words and phrases arising from the unconscious are set down without any conscious control. I did that. Brenton called it, well, through some of it, not all of it, but a lot of it, thoughts dictation, independent of any aesthetic or moral preoccupation. I did that. But the process simply means that the way is opened to the stream of unconscious images, and the important or even decisive part to be played by consciousness is ignored. As Dr. Jung has shown in this chapter, it is the consciousness that holds the key to the values of the unconscious, that therefore plays the decisive part. Consciousness alone is competent to determine the meaning of the images and to recognize their significance for man here and now in the concrete reality of presence. Only in an interplay of consciousness and unconsciousness can the unconscious prove its value and perhaps even show a way to overcome the melancholy of the void. If the unconscious, once in action, is left to itself, there is a risk that its contents will become overpowering and will manifest their negative, destructive side. Kind of like when someone's laying in bed because they're depressed and their unconscious says, just lay in bed. You're depressed, don't get up. But the conscious tells you have a life to live. You have things to do. You can't just lay in bed. You can't let the unconscious take over. Leads to destructive, negative results. If we look at the surrealist picture, like Salvador Dali's The Burning Giraffe, with this in mind, we may feel the wealth of their fantasy and the overwhelming power of their unconscious imagery, but we realize the horror and the symbolism of the end of all things that speaks from many of them. The unconscious is pure nature, and like nature, pours out its gifts in profusion. But left to itself, and without human response from the consciousness, it can, again like nature, destroy its own gifts, and sooner or later sweep them into annihilation. The question of the role of consciousness in modern painting also arises in connection with the use of chance as means of composing paintings. In Beyond Painting, Max Ernst wrote, "The association of a sewing machine and an umbrella on a surgical table," he is quoting from the poet Lautréamont, "is a familiar example, which has now become classical, of the phenomenon discovered by the surrealists, and the association of two or more apparently alien elements on the plane alien to both is the most potent ignition of poetry." I'm going to read that again. "Which has now become classical, of the phenomenon discovered by the surrealists, that the association of two or more apparently alien elements on a plane alien to both is the most potent ignition of poetry." Interesting. It's an interesting thought. That is probably as difficult for the layman to comprehend, yes, as the comment Brenton made to the same effect. The man who cannot visualize a horse galloping on a tomato is an idiot. We might recall here the chance, in quotations, association of a marble head and red rubber gloves in Chirico's picture. Of course, many of these associations were intended as jokes and nonsense, But most modern artists have been concerned with something radically different from jokes. Chance plays a significant part in the work of the French sculptor Jean or Hans Arp. His woodcuts of leaves and other forms thrown together at random were another expression of the quest for, as he put it, a secret primal meaning slumbering beneath the world of appearances. He called them leaves arranged according to the laws of chance and squares arranged according to the laws of chance. In these compositions, it is chance that gives depth to the work of the art. It points to an unknown but active principle of order and meaning that becomes manifest in things as their secret soul. It was above all the desire to make chance essential, in Paul Klee's words, that underlay the surrealists' efforts to take the grain of wood, cloud formations, and so on as a starting point for their visionary painting. Max Ernst, for instance, went back to Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote an essay on Botticelli's remark that if you throw a paint-soaked sponge at a wall, in the splashes, it makes you will see heads, animals, landscapes, and a host of other configurations. Ernst has described how a vision pursued him in 1925. It forced itself on him as he was staring at a tiled floor marked by thousands of scratches. In order to give foundation to my powers of meditation and hallucination, I made series of drawings of the tiles by laying sheets of paper on them at random and then taking graphite rubbings. When I fixed my eyes on the result, I was astounded by a suddenly sharpened sense of hallucinatory series of contrasting and superposed pictures. I made a collection of the first results obtained from these frottages and called it Histoire Naturelle. It is important to note that Ernst placed over or behind some of these frottages a ring or circle, which gives the picture a peculiar atmosphere and depth. Here, the psychologist can recognize the unconscious drive to oppose the chaotic hazards of the image's natural language by symbol of self-contained psychic whole, the establishing equilibrium. The ring or circle dominates the picture. Psychic wholeness rules nature, itself meaningful and giving meaning. In Max Ernst's efforts to pursue the secret pattern of things, we may detect an infinity with the 19th century Romantics. They spoke of nature's handwriting, which can be seen everywhere on wings, eggshells, and clouds, snow, ice, crystal, and other strange conjunctions of chance. Just as much as in dreams or visions, they saw everything as the expression of one and the same pictorial language of nature. Thus, it was a genuinely romantic gesture when Max Ernst called the pictures produced by his experiments natural history. And he was right, for the unconscious, which had conjured up the pictures in the chance of configuration of things, is nature. It is with Ernst's natural history, or Arp's compositions of chance, that the reflections of the psychological begin. He is faced with the question of what meaning a chance arrangement, wherever and whoever it comes about, can have for the man who happens on it. With this question, man and consciousness come into the matter, and with them the possibility of meaning. Some of the art. The chance created picture may be beautiful or ugly, harmonious or discordant, rich or poor in content, well or ill painted. These factors determine its artistic value, but they cannot satisfy the psychologist, often to the distress of the artist or anyone who finds supreme satisfaction in contemplation of form. The psychologist seeks further and tries to understand the secret code, in quotations, of chance arrangement, as so far as a man can decipher it all. The number and form of the objects thrown together at random by art raise as many questions as any detail of Ernst's fantastic frottages. For the psychologist, they are symbols, and therefore they cannot only be felt, but up to a certain point can also be interpreted. The apparent or actual retreat of man from many modern works of art, the lack of reflection, and the predominance of the unconscious over the conscious offer critics frequent points of attack. They speak of pathological art or compare it with pictures by the insane, for it is characteristic of psychoses with consciousness and the ego personality are submerged and drowned, in quotations, by floods of contents from the unconscious regions of the psyche. It is true that the comparison is not so odious today that it was even a generation ago. When Dr. Jung first pointed out a connection of this kind in his essay on Picasso, it provoked a storm of indignation. Today, the catalog of well-known Zurich art galleries speaks of the almost schizophrenic obsession of a famous artist and the German writer Rudolf Kasner, described as George Trakl as one of the greatest German poets. Continuing, there was something schizophrenic about him. It can be felt in his work. There is a touch of schizophrenia in it too. Yes, Trakl is a great poet. It is now realized that the states of schizophrenia and the artistic visions are not mutually exclusive. To my mind, the famous experiments with mescaline and similar drugs have contributed to this change of attitude. These drugs create a condition accompanied by intense visions of color and forms. Not unlike the schizophrenia, more than one artist of today has sought inspiration in such a drug. Barely made it through that chapter. So that one. And the next one is The Retreat from Reality. I will be recording that. Is that another long chapter? Holy smokes, it is. Anyway, barely made it through that one. Peace in, peace out.